This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guest today is Sonnie Trotter. Sonnie is a world-renowned rock climber, father, husband, writer, and the author of the new book, Uplifted, The Evolution of a Climbing Life. For the past 3 decades, Sonnie has built a career as one of the most accomplished climbers of his generation, pushing standards, putting up first ascents, and bringing a sense of creativity, humility, and grit to every project he tackles. His new book, Uplifted, is part memoir, part meditation on movement and meaning, and it's one of the most thoughtful and grounded climbing books I've read in a long time. In this conversation, Sonnie and I talk about the unexpected ways writing has shaped his life, how his approach to climbing has evolved over the years, and what it's been like to move from living out of a van to raising a family in the mountains of Canada. We also discuss how he stayed grounded throughout his career, his relationship with sponsors like Patagonia, and why gratitude, and not rage or ego, has been the driving force behind his decades of commitment to climbing. Sonnie also talks about how parenting has shifted his perspective on adventure, freedom, and ambition, and how he and his wife are raising their kids in a way that emphasizes curiosity, effort, and joy. Whether you're a climber, a writer, a parent, or just someone trying to live a meaningful life, there's a ton of wisdom in this episode. Sonnie's new book, Uplifted, is out now, and I highly recommend picking up a copy. You'll find a link in the episode notes, along with links to everything else we discussed. Hope you enjoyed both this conversation and the book. Thanks so much for listening. So, Sonnie, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you got so much going on with the book coming out in the next few days, but we were talking before we started recording, and I was just saying how much I love the book. I mean, from an athletic perspective, it's hard for me to fully relate to the level of athleticism you bring to the climbing world, but from a way that you approach life, way you approach family, the actual approach you take to your athletics, I got so much out of the book, and I felt like I could relate in a way that it gave me motivation and it gave me kind of perspective on things. So my first thing is thank you for writing the book. And then my first question for you is not about climbing, but about writing. And I'd love to know, when did writing become such an important part of your life? Because you're obviously really good at it.
Gosh, thank you. Thank you very, very much. It's an honor. And, I think when I look back at my high school life, I think English was actually one of my more favorite subjects. We can't really decide how our brains are wired, but for some reason I just enjoyed English, and I especially enjoyed the creative writing section of English. And I've never really had any official training or anything like that, so I've always been insecure about my writing, thinking that I was just, I could communicate a story, but when I read really good writers, and I read really good writing, it does make me feel a little bit insecure, kind of that imposter syndrome. But I started writing things down in a journal when I was a teenager, and not necessarily to write creatively, but just to get it through my system and onto paper somehow, like so I could remember it. I don't know if it's the ADHD or whatever, but I have a hard time just remembering things, and my brain gets a little cluttered with thoughts sometimes. And writing has been really helpful in clarifying those thoughts and remembering them. So I probably started writing, I guess, on my own at about 16 years old ish.
I remember when I was in high school, I had this really great English teacher, and I was talking about an essay I'd written, and I told him, I said, after I finished the essay, I understand it all so much better. He goes, yeah, that's all writing is it's just thinking in kind of a more organized fashion. And ever since then, I've done the same, man. I've always tried to journal. I wish I did it every day, but I feel like journaling is a good way for me to kind of make sense of all the crazy stuff rambling around in my brain chaotically and put some order to it. Do you have any particular mentors or writer or authors that you have admired that have influenced your work?
Yeah, for sure. It's probably very common in my sphere here in the climbing world, but John Long was and is one of the best writers that I've come across in mountain culture. And for his humor, his, also like humility and telling like really, like he's told some really beautiful and sad stories in the past, and he just does it in a way that is emotional. And, I do think that emotional writing is probably some of the most memorable writing. But when I look at my writing, I feel like it's been a history of technical writing. It's more of like reporting on things that happened as opposed to tapping into this really, deeper place. And so when I do come across a phrase or a paragraph that I've written that I was proud of, it does stand out to me. And I hope it resonates with people. But there is a lot of like, there is also a lot of technical parts of climbing that gets kind of, it can kind of lose some people who aren't as, deeply embedded as I am into the nuances of climbing. But yeah, John Long was always, I read a lot of his stuff. Barry Blanchard is also one of my favorite authors in the climbing world. He can describe things in a very poetic way. I remember reading like Lynn Hill's book when I was like 20 years old, 21. I would bring it to the crag with me, and I would, during rest periods or lunch, I'd sit down and read a chapter. And I remember having an influence, that had an influence on me too. It raised a lot of questions about, because I was so committed to living the climbing life at that point. I was all in. There was no other way for me. And reading someone else who basically lived a similar level of commitment was really helpful. So, lots of different writers out there, lots of different styles and approaches. Matt Samet has always been a favorite magazine writer. He's also written books and is a really good editor, but some of his early writing was just so comical, and it brought humor to things that we all as climbers could take too seriously. So I'm glad that I've read a lot and have a big influence of, lots of different people in the community.
Yeah, that's really cool. I feel like books are such a way to get in the brains of people that you may not ever have the opportunity to meet, although you've probably had the opportunity to meet the vast majority of, the heroes that you had before you were fully on the scene. So I bet that's kind of a wild way to think about things. But for this book particular, I'm curious when you decided or when you got it in your head, like, okay, I want to write a book, or I think I've got stories here that I'd like to share with the world. Because, when I think about your career after learning about it in detail from this book, I feel like you could write a book for every 12-month period for all the adventures. And so I'm curious, why now when it comes to telling these stories? Because you're still a youngster. We're the same age. Spring chicken.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way to look at it. Good healthy mentality there. I think because life is just a lot different now with raising a family than it once was. And, I think this really came to become a real thing when my wife and I took our kids on an extended road trip, and we lived in that little scamp trailer.
Yeah.
And we just, we're like, everyone said, do it while the kids are young. And so they were small and young and happy and healthy and playful. And we just loaded them up into a little scamp trailer, fiberglass trailer. And we went climbing, and we slept, I don't remember, 250 nights in that thing. And we did all sorts of great traveling. And at the end of that trip, I was starting to talk to Patagonia more and more about, collecting these short stories or a collection of short stories. And that's the way I typically look at this book. The thought of like writing a book is too daunting for me. So yeah. I really try to break it up into these, these smaller short stories that people can read independently, and they can, pick up chapter 6 and then read chapter 11 later. Or they can read it as a journey from start to finish. And that was really kind of an inflection point, was when our kids started, at the end of that trip is when I started really putting things down and trying to shape how this was going to look. Yeah. And so that's kind of how the process unfolded. And then COVID hit in 2020, and our kids were just home all the time. We had no daycare, of course, no school, anything like that. And so I actually almost shelved it because I just couldn't concentrate when our kids were home, and the weather was good for the most part in the spring, and we were just trying to get out of the house and get outside and be active. And so I really didn't have the time to sit down and concentrate. And I picked things up a little bit later, but a lot of it had been really hashed out earlier. I just sort of had to go back, revisit it, and then polish things up a bit. So it's definitely been a work in progress. And, what better time to reflect on things than it was around 25 years that I'd been committed to climbing. And now it's going on 30. I'm 45. I started when I was 15. And so it just feels like it feels like a full circle, I was 15 at the time. My son is now 11 years old, and it's happening so fast. So I'm like, he's 4 years away from when I had this sort of transformational experience where I was like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And he's 4 years away from that. So, it does feel like a good time. It does. Yeah. And, I'm not able to climb as much as I used to. And, so it seemed like the stars aligned, and Patagonia was interested in working with me, and I wanted to work with them. And so it all kind of came together, and here it is, 2 days away from launch.
Oh man, it's, we were saying before we started recording, I've been working on my own kind of little writing project and struggling with it for so long. And so I have, that's one thing, although I'll never climb a 513 route, I can definitely understand the struggle of trying to get one of these things out in the world, and the self-doubt and all the crazy stuff that comes with it. And so congratulations, man. I mean, cause it's just getting anything into the world is a huge, huge accomplishment, but especially a book that resonates like this. So it's great. And I do want to ask you one question that you've answered a million times before, but for folks who may not be immersed in the rock climbing world, because the people who listen to this podcast, it's a wide range of people. Could you just kind of give a brief overview of where you grew up, how you grew up, and how you did end up stumbling into the climbing world at age 15?
Yeah, totally. So I grew up just north of Toronto, Ontario. I grew up on a farm. My parents looked for a place that they could raise me and my two sisters in a place that felt, a little bit wild and free to them. And It was just a wonderful upbringing. It's one of those luck things that I was just born into a really, a really good family and
Sure.
and with good values. And I'm so grateful for that time on the farm. We then moved, and when I was kind of coming into I guess preteen, teenager lifestyle, we moved to the suburbs closer to Toronto. And my parents needed to be closer to work. My sisters wanted to be closer to school. And I kind of, went through a period where I was like, I didn't really know where I was fitting in the world. And, I was playing sports. I was doing gymnastics and hockey and things like that. But, I would say that none of them were I didn't really have an emotional connection to them. I mean, I loved doing them. They were fun, and I loved being, I loved being tired and exuding force. But, I was kind of seeking something else, and I started reading Canadian Geographic magazine and learning about mountains and mountain climbing. And that led to paddling and mountain biking. And I started biking more, and I was really enjoying going on camping trips. And so I started sort of getting away from traditional sports and sort of a traditional lifestyle, and started looking for these, really these places that represented sort of peace and beauty. And I don't know why exactly. Maybe it was that influence on the farm, but I was longing for more of that. And that journey led me to sort of discovering climbing. First, it was actually at a carnival in downtown Toronto, and then I discovered that there's indoor climbing gyms, and I was like, "Wow, this is incredible!" But it was too far away from us, and so I couldn't visit very often. And then a gym actually opened up locally in my hometown, and I think we were the 5th climbing gym in Canada. And today there's 135 maybe across Canada, and there's 600 to 700 climbing gyms in the US. And so I was exposed to it really early on, and I was just absolutely in love with these photographs on the wall, these posters that these athletes would travel like to places, like really remote places, whether it was Vietnam or the Himalayas, and they were just, these photographs were so captivating to me. It's hard to imagine these places exist on this planet. You're like, really? That place exists? Like, and where I was living, it was very flat, surrounded by farmland and cookie cutter houses. And I would see these pictures of like, these far away magical places. And my curiosity just started expanding. And so I started competing in the gyms, and that would open up a little bit more travel. And then I met more and more people who were like living this full-time climbing lifestyle, and they were just living in their vans or whatever and traveling, following the weather from place to place. And to me, that was just the most fascinating way to approach life. And so I dove all in, and I've been traveling and climbing for 25 years now, and climbing for 30, but I graduated high school, 17, 18 years old. I went to Colorado, and I got the bug, and it just kept growing from there. And I just never stopped. People talk about perseverance a lot, and, looking back, I guess that's what it was. I just never quit. I had a hard time. I had a hard time looking at the alternative and being satisfied with that. And so
that makes sense. And I think it's one of the things I really loved about your book is that it took me back to like my high school and college years. And when you're talking about seeing those photos in different magazines or in books, people need to remember like that was the only place you could see them. It's not like you could Google it and get 1,000 pictures of some, or like when you went to Rifle, Colorado, I would imagine you had seen stuff in books, you had heard word of mouth, maybe seen some friends' photos, but it's not like you really knew what you were getting into when you went down there, because there just was not this deluge of information that you can find anywhere in the world and see pictures of it now before you go. And so you really were jumping off kind of into the unknown in a way that people can't really appreciate now because of the internet. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, entirely. Like when I was telling my parents, hey, I'm driving, I'm 17 years old. I just got out of, just graduated high school, and I'm like, I'm driving to Colorado for 3 months. And they're like, where are you going? And I'm like, well, I saw this picture, and, no email, no cell phone, no nothing, no way of contacting me, and I'm driving halfway across the continent, and, just based on these photographs that I saw. And yeah, and those images, they burn into you because it's all you had. And magazines, they were huge. They for finding inspiration. There was no Instagram, YouTube, like none of that existed. You had like one copy of like a VHS tape of
that you'd made copies of from your friends, so it was all like blurry.
Totally. And you're just like watching it over and over, and just just diving in pretty hard. And so, traveling in that time was kind of scary, because you didn't know how it was going to pan out, and you didn't know exactly where you were going. You're just going in the right direction and hoping that, that leads to the next step, and that leads to the next step. And sure enough, it did. And once I discovered that's how the best way to approach things, I just kept doing it year after year after year. And things evolved.
Well, there's one line that I underlined that I thought was pretty cool in your book, where you were talking about what drove you to pursue this. Because when I hear persistence, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons people can be persistent. I think on one end, there's some kind of just crazy, like I think about Michael Jordan, just a crazy competitive drive, and he just wants to win at all costs. He'll do anything. And then on the other side of the spectrum, it's something kind of driven out of love or out of, just curiosity, a more kind of lighthearted approach to things. And there was a line in the book where you were talking about your pursuit of climbing. You said it was not out of self-loathing or rage, but out of love for place and the climbs themselves, and possibly gratitude just for having the opportunity. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about that, about how that, and also how it evolved, because you're obviously competitive. I mean, you were obviously competitive, even if it was just with yourself, to accomplish as much as you did so quickly. But how do you think about what drove you both early on and then now, from the competitive side on the competitive end to the kind of gratitude end?
Competitive. I'll talk about that first. I don't know. Again, a lot of this stuff is, people don't know where things come from inside them, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes, we don't know. I don't know if I can explain that, but I've always enjoyed a little bit of challenge,
Sure.
I think the reason that I quit competition climbing, I quit at 23 was my last competition. And I didn't enjoy the process of competition. And I think that's why, you'd travel, you'd go to this competition, you'd get locked in on isolation, and then you get to view the climb, and you get 1 or 2 attempts, and then you get ranked. And I started just really not enjoying that process, and traveling to climb and going on an adventure just felt so much more free. And so I gravitated towards that. But then, yeah, to a degree, I wanted to see if I was capable of climbing these at this level that I read about. Like, I remember I was that kid who scribbled, like a 514 rating on my notebook, even when I was climbing 510, 511, and I would just scribble it. Like, it had a ring to it. 514. Yeah. I was like, it was this unattainable thing. And, I don't know why I worked as hard as I did. I think I did just at the end of the day, I just loved moving. I love the way it moves, climbing. It's that flow state people talk about, right? Mm-hmm. It could be, for some people, it's skiing and mountain biking and swimming, and there's all sorts of ways to feel the flow. And I thought that climbing, I just connected with the flow state of climbing. And so it wasn't hard for me to put in hours of work, because I genuinely just loved the movement,
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I was, I don't know if I was competing. Yeah. I mean, I know that I wanted to see how far I could go with climbing before, like, I call it like regular life took hold.
Sure.
And I just kept trying to delay regular life because it was scary to me. Like, I knew this other world existed where I could pursue climbing and live in the mountains. And I just loved that time so much that the alternative was scary to me. And settling down, not being able to travel as much, just feeling not as free as you were at that moment. Yeah. And if I felt trapped in any way, that would terrify me. And so I always fought to keep my options open and to be able to travel. And that, of course, came with, 12 years of poverty, because I never saved a single dollar that I made. I would work and then reinvest that money to have that experience again, that freedom and that wild open space, and then the exhaustion that comes with trying hard. I lived off of that. It was a bit of a drug, I would say. And I did kind of mildly obsess over it. I don't necessarily think it's a unhealthy obsession, but I did obsess over it. I loved it so much. And I don't know. I mean, as the way you see climbing growing now, and more people doing and trying to live that, like, it's very common. If you had the choice, why wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, and the reason I asked that question is because in the way the book is written, and then just in our conversation so far, it's you just strike me as very balanced and just a nice kind of calm, laid back guy. Like, there's not some deep seated anger. Like, there are plenty of writers who've written great books about mountaineering, and you can tell that there's something bubbling beneath the surface that is driving them. And with you, you just strike me as being, you're competitive with yourself, and you want to push yourself, and you love that part of it. But it's all coming from a much more positive place, I would say. But I'm not trying to be like psychiatrist or anything. But it's much different than some of the kind of some of the mountaineering literature that I've read where there's some darkness there.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. There is a dark side to, alpinism, mountaineering, and even in rock climbing, it drives a lot of different people that way. And, Mark Twight always kind of wrote about the dark side, and, but no, you're absolutely right. And that always kind of was an insecurity of mine as well. It's like, I've always just felt grateful, and, that gratitude has always helped me have a healthy perspective on life. And so it does make me feel insecure when I write about it, because it's like, well, there's just not a lot of torment or suffering.
No, but it's purely authentic, man. Like that's what I always tell people.
Right.
Nowadays, people start getting nervous before they come on this podcast, and
right.
Well, it's just me sitting in the basement. I say there's one way you can screw this up, and it's to try to act like you're somebody you're not. And so I think that's what's very clear in your book is like it's you, it's authentic, and that's why it was so intriguing to me, because I'm kind of used to the tortured soul story, and I really love the positivity and the optimism, but also just the grind. I mean, it's very clear that it was not a easy path, and it's not just hanging out in the meadow in Yosemite. I mean, you make it very clear about some of the financial realities of it. And that's one thing I wanted to ask you about. There's one part towards the beginning where you go to the OR show and you're looking for sponsors and come out zero with no new prospects of sponsorship that would be significant. I'm curious, when did Patagonia come in as a supporter of your work, and not just your work, but your whole approach to it? This kind of non-competitive focus on travel, focus on the process, focus on experience, because it seems like a perfect match. But I'm curious how that relationship evolved.
That was so I started kind of working with Patagonia a little bit in 2004, and then more sort of more officially in 2005, and then definitely all in by 2006. And it all starts with just showing up all the time in the industry, and you start to meet other people, and those relationships last quite a long time, and in some cases, many decades. A lot of the people that I met at those early trade shows are still in the climbing industry one way or another, and I still see them. And so, it's amazing looking back. At the time, I never would have guessed that, but looking back, it's an incredible kind of thing to reflect on. But I started my climbing journey, and I was struggling with the financial part of it. I would have to work for, 8 months as a carpenter, or, I worked in shipping and receiving. I did all sorts of odd jobs. And then I would try to save up as much as I could. And then I would travel for, 4 months of the year and try to climb my brains out, basically living that, going to these places that I was dreaming about and trying to climb the hardest routes in each area. And then I would come home, and I'd be kind of, I'd have credit card debt or whatever, and I have to start working, pay that off, start saving up a little bit. And this sort of pattern repeated. And I think a big turning point, to be honest, was when there's a story in there about, this bank offering me a line of credit, and I was like, what is a line of credit? And that was literally the turning point, because what happened was I broke the cycle of working for, 8 months and climbing for 4. And I went all in, and I bought a little minivan, and I just lived off of the line of credit for like a year, basically. And at the end of that year, I had so much rhythm and momentum in my climbing that I was doing these things that, people and some of the writers in the magazine cultures were considered notable. And they were like, hey, do you want to do an interview? Do you want to take some photographs of this climb? And slowly, I started getting, I guess, some recognition for those climbs that I wanted to do anyway. Those were my dream climbs. And when I did them, I got a little bit of recognition. And so when I first met with someone at Patagonia through a friend of mine, it was kind of shocking to me that they had said, oh yeah, I'm familiar with your climbing. I've been following along, and I was like surprised, and that led to a couple of free t-shirts, and then a year later it led to a little bit of gas money, and it's evolved ever since. And so it was really that the inflection point there was like that year of me just committing to spending every dollar I could borrow to live in completely on the road and immersed in that life. Because when I was fighting the economics of saving up, going, it was happening, but it was a very slow process. And so, again, I just took the leap. I took this small line of credit, and I just went all in for 18 months, and I just didn't look back. And I just said, I think one of the comments is like, my future self could worry about that, about the debt that was piling up. And it wasn't necessarily the smartest thing to do on paper, but again, my heart led me to that. And I was like, if I could just do this and get it out of my system, maybe I could just go back to college or university, and knowing that I at least tried. And ultimately what happened was, this relationship with Patagonia, which has been going on for, 20 years. And so, to answer your question, that was how it all started for me.
There is something about that going all in. And I hear that theme a lot, whether you're talking with, writers who are like novelists, for example, where you have to write the full novel before you can actually sell it. And they just decide, all right, I got to go all in and get this thing done after messing around with it for many years. Or, entrepreneurs, for example, charging up a bunch of credit card debt to get the business going. I don't know. I guess there's pros and cons to those, but there are more stories of people, just all the great things that happen when you fully commit, which I think is cool. And then that reminds me, I have a quote your dad gave you at some point. He said, don't worry about what anyone else is doing ever. Just pick one thing you love, focus on it, and become the best you can possibly be. What do your parents think of your career now?
I don't know exactly, but I sense that they're proud of me. I get a feeling that they're proud of me. They tell me the odd story here and there, how, they would run into somebody who, who knew me or whatever. And they would tell them a story about how, maybe a climb that I did or a trip that I did or a report that I wrote maybe inspired them and stuff. So they tell me these little feedbacks that I get. And it's very comforting to get that, but even with that advice, it's like, even if they didn't approve or they weren't proud of me for some reason, that advice was strong enough to me that it was like, I'm proud of myself. And, and I think at the end of the day, I think that that's what he meant by that. Like, don't worry about what your mom or I think. There is a little bit of a deeper message there somehow. And I know he wanted me to go to college because he didn't. And I know he was worried about me. There was a time when he thought I was going to end up like a homeless man living under a bridge. And, it did appear that way. I mean, it did appear that I was going down that road. I cared very little for materialistic things, and I cared very little for, I would call it the school path and the career path. I wanted to live a life of excitement and adventure and freedom. And it didn't seem like that was going to be rewarded in any way. And, one time he came out, both my parents came out to Squamish to visit me, and I was sleeping in my van, and I actually rented a little storage locker. I remember this. I was renting a storage locker to keep all my climbing gear because it started to add up, and I needed a little bit of extra space. And so I showed them the storage locker and then of course the van, and they're like, well, like, where do you hang out? And I was like, like anywhere, coffee shop, the park, in my van, I'll park in some beautiful spot. And so they kind of spent a week with me, and then I showed them around this beautiful playground of Squamish. It's just, the scenery is unbelievable. It was their first visit. And on the way home back to the airport, my dad actually, he said, you're living a really good life. And that was really powerful to me. It wasn't much in the way of like, and like a straightforward compliment, but it showed me that I was, it showed me that he was proud of the decisions I was making, and
Sure.
that kind of reinforced things. And it helped me keep going as well, knowing that, I wasn't entirely disappointing them. And sometimes
that's cool, man.
Yeah, sometimes that's all it takes, from someone you love or a friend, is like, you're living a good life. You're on the right track.
Yeah, that's quite a compliment from anybody, but especially your parents. And then that brings me to, now you're a parent and you're well into parenting. And I'd love to hear just about the evolution of being completely free. When you and your wife met, y'all were adventure partners, and you could kind of do whatever you wanted, whenever you wanted, because you would work very hard to create this life. And then just, by necessity, when you have kids, it's going to slow down a bit. I mean, you obviously continue to prioritize travel, as is detailed in the book, but I'd love just to hear more about when your first child was born, how you thought about that, how the adjustment was, because it's one of these things when, for me at least, I would see people with kids and I had all these ideas about how it worked and how it could be constraining on things, but you don't ever know until you're actually a parent. You can't make these assumptions looking at everybody else. It's, you're a different person after that child is born. Could you just talk me through a bit of that transition of, I don't know if you call it slowing down a bit, or evolving a bit, or reprioritizing, but how did parenting kind of change you and your wife's approach to everything? You could write a whole book about that, I know.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it absolutely changed in the frequency in which, I would, like, it has slowed down. There's no question about that, because the day to day, the week to week, the month to month of parenting, just, it has some constraints, and that's okay. We wanted a family. We knew that it was going to come with constraints. And I would say that we're lucky, again, the word luck versus hard work, but we've worked very hard to make places like Squamish and Canmore, which are the climbing meccas of Canada. We've worked very hard to make them our home. And so, even though I can't travel to all the places I wish I could, or we can't do all the climbs that are on our dream list, which continues to grow year after year because we're not addressing them as fast. But that's one aspect of life that you have to come to terms with. But the fact that we get to live in places that allow us to still get our fix, get our outlet. I'm literally a 15-minute, approach from a canyon. Like I could get into the mountains very, very quickly, and that was by design. That's not by accident. And so that helped. That helped a lot, because we're like, well, yeah, we're going to have a family, but we also get to live here and do it, and so I would say that's been an important part is, whatever you value in life, to make that a priority, and my wife and I do not value, material things. We value time, we value, health, and, we value being, surrounded by an environment that we connect with. Those are three things that we put high on the sort of the value chart. And so having kids, yeah, it slowed down our traveling. It's and that's okay. My belief is that we'll get back to that one day, but it hasn't really slowed down our inspiration, because I have a community here. People are drawn to these communities because they share the same passion. So
sure.
All of our friends share the same passion, and I'm inspired by what they do. And, it all feeds off each other. So I still get, our cups are still quite filled up quite regularly, I would say, because of that. And so I hope that answers your question. It's we all have choices, and I hope we have choices, and we've made the decision to live in a place that we connect with, that doesn't force us to let go completely of our dreams, and so that's our way. I think of sort of balancing that. And I have friends, like I have very close friends who've had to move away because their partner's family lives in another town and there's no climbing nearby. And they're just like, you know what, this is the choice I've made. And this is the commitment I'm making to my family, and there's a part of them that wants to come back when, or they take their vacation and they travel to places that inspire them. It could be anywhere. It could be Moab, Utah for a mountain biking trip, or skiing trip somewhere, or paddling on a Great Lakes or something like that. But but they make this choice to not live here, and living here has been not easy because we don't have family here. We don't have our family nearby. We've had to choose, day after day, month after month, year after year, to stay here, despite the fact that it's harder raising kids without a family, to support you. And so, it's at the end of the day, it's really like, what do you value? And then are you willing to make sacrifice?
Well, and I think one of the things that struck me in the book is your community and friendships are just seem to be extremely important to you. And I feel like every chapter of the book there, you get this feeling of how much you value both your climbing partners and your friends, and obviously your wife. And I think that's really a smart move, is putting yourself in a community where other people value the same things. I think that's very, very wise, and it's not, it's an easy concept, but hard to execute, I think. One more I'm going to ask you another question about parenting, just because I'm looking for free parenting advice. With your little ones, how have you approached introducing them to different activities, sports? Because they may end up loving climbing, or they may not. They may end up loving skiing, they may not. And when I think about introducing my girls, they go to the climbing gym all the time. We take them skiing, we take them camping. But my whole approach at this point is I just want it to be fun. I want it to be fun. They can choose down the road what they want, but everything now is fun. How do you go about introducing your kids to all the different activities you can do there in Canmore?
Yeah, we have I think I like to believe that we have a very balanced approach to it. We do not encourage our children to sign up for any competitive activities at this stage. They're, my daughter's turning 8 this summer. Our son is 11. We let them tell us what they want to do. Same, I would say that was kind of how I was raised. I did 1 year of baseball, didn't like it. It was too slow for me, and I quit. And that, I did 1 year of this. I did 5 years of that, and I moved around a little bit. And our kids are kind of the same thing. They're right now, our son's in jujitsu.
I'm doing jujitsu.
Okay.
I was going to try to go through this whole thing without mentioning jujitsu, and I was like, I'm not going to talk about jujitsu. And there you go. You baited me, man. Now this is going to turn into a jujitsu podcast. Jujitsu is awesome.
I'm happy to talk about it because he loves it, and it's really fascinating because what I loved about climbing was kind of this technical part of it. Like I loved sequencing. Like you cannot put your right foot up as high as you want to without first shifting your hips to the left, and then getting the left hand like in a sort of inverted position. That's just how the body mechanics work. And I kind of geeked out on that early. I was like, oh my God, like climbing is this puzzle. But if you don't understand sequencing, then the whole thing is lost. And so he's showing me moves that he's like, oh yeah, you have to do this, and then you can do this other thing. And it is quite technical. And so I'm loving watching him. We have no influence, I know nothing about jiu-jitsu, and yet here he is. He's just signed up for his first competition in June 10th. And he's never really had a competitive bone in his body before this. So it's just like, hey, me and my buddy want to do this, and we're like, okay, let's do it. We've certainly, for better or for worse, we've never pushed them to be competitive in anything to this stage. And if they choose to be, we want to be supportive as we possibly can. But until that day comes, we're just going to enjoy a a range of things. We swim a little bit, we climb a little bit. Our kids are not showing interest in, becoming climbers per se. It's just a fun activity, just like biking is a fun activity. And so, yeah, they're being exposed. Our daughter's in gymnastics. She does it twice a week. We'll see where that goes if she wants to do 3 days a week. But yeah, from a parenting perspective, I think we're probably just middle of the pack, exposing our kids to lots of fun stuff and getting the feedback from them, but we do encourage them to try hard at things. I'd say,
yes.
If you're going to try it, just try hard at least once per session, not every, just know what that feels like to tap into that try hard at least once, like for our son, he's very timid. And so with mountain biking, he feels like he's getting pushed around a little bit, and he doesn't like the technical trails. And I understand that it can be scary, especially if, he likes to have control. And so, but our job is to push him a little bit. And so, maybe if we go on a bike ride, we'll do one section that's intimidating for him. And I think that's just how we're doing it until they, till they start giving us more feedback. Basically, it's our job to encourage them.
Yeah, that's the same approach my wife and I take. I mean, I'm really into effort. I really want them to, if they're going to do something, I want them to give it their best shot. But beyond that, it's just kind of like, have fun, push yourself. And I've really seen that with my oldest daughter. She does violin, and I've been so impressed with the effort required for that, and all the benefits that come from learning how to push through uncomfortableness. And it's not, it's not physical uncomfortableness, but I think in some ways physical, at least for me, physical uncomfortableness is easier to deal with than the mental part. Well, the reason I started doing jiu-jitsu, I started probably like a year and a half ago, is because I injured my shoulder when I was 45, and I kind of came out of that, and I was like, all right, clock's ticking here. I need to, if I'm going to do jiu-jitsu, like I kind of need to hurry up and do it, because whether I like it or not, I'm in my mid 40s and my body is not doing like it used to do. And so I'm curious, as you've, gotten into your mid 40s, and how have you changed your approach to both training and climbing, but also, the little things like nutrition and sleep? Because one of the things that I laughed about a lot in your book is how your diet early on, and it's just like, I just need calories, man. I don't care what the cheap carbs will do it. But now if I eat cheap carbs, it's like I'm hungover for 3 days. And so I might as well have drank like a case of beer. So how has that journey been of kind of evolving both your training and your nutrition and your sleep to deal with the unavoidable reality of getting older?
Yeah, I do. I think everybody comes to that realization as well, and they take it more seriously. I hope they do. We try to get our seven hours minimum if we can. Life still happens. I had to get up at 4:20 the other day to make it to some event, and then I had to try to recover from that. But for the most part, sleep is super priority, because, I don't recover as fast as I used to when I was 25 or 15 for sure. 25, 35, now I'm 45. I'm just recovering more slowly. And I have friends in their 50s who tell me it's, 2 days of rest becomes 3 days of rest after a hard day. So that's inevitable. And a couple of things I'm doing to offset that is I've actually started taking a higher protein approach, because I'm training more, what's the word? Analytically, I suppose, methodically.
Sure.
I didn't approach it like that when I was younger. I kind of just went at it as this Hail Mary, kind of just go for it, figure it out. The climb will dictate how hard I need to try or how strong I need to become. But now, with, smaller blocks of time and more specific goals and these limitations of recovery, I'm training more, systematically. And so now I'm taking protein to sort of help me recover faster, so I won't fall too far behind. So that's one thing for sure. So yeah, sleep, my training's more systematic. I'm taking more vitamins probably than I ever have before. And my wife is a phenomenal influence on me in terms of, cooking and diet. She's always valued, high quality food.
Yeah, I remember that's in the book when you look down in her basket at the grocery store and then look at yours and you're like, what the hell am I doing here?
I'm so glad you picked up on those things.
Yeah, I did. I definitely did.
She's always valued high quality food, and that's like one of those things I talk about is like, what do you value in life? She values high quality food, and she's not afraid to spend more money on better quality ingredients or better quality nutrition. And so she's had a huge influence on me. Just, I think if it was just me being, bachelor Sonnie, I think I'd probably still fall victim to eating, quick, cheap carbs from more often than I do.
Sure.
And thank God she keeps me on track, and I eat fairly nutritious food daily because of her influence. So yeah, that's how I kind of, fell into readjusting, recalibrating how I approach, climbing.
Nice.
Yeah. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's kind of, I feel kind of weird, like comparing myself to you, like when it comes to sports stuff, but that's the same approach. I've been going crazy with the protein, and it's very hard to get the amount that they say you're supposed to have. Like that's a lot of damn protein, but I push through. I can make it happen thanks to some.
I never hit the target.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
right. You're making me feel better about everything.
It's too much work. Yeah. I'm trying. I'm definitely better than I used to be, but holy moly, it's a lot of work to hit those targets. And I also drink a lot more water. I would say I drink more water than I used to, and it does make me feel better. I actually do recover a lot faster when I force myself to drink a bucket of water. Yeah.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah.
Well, when you think about this evolution of both your training and your life, and going from kind of being free to do whatever you want, whenever you want, to having obligations that you obviously love, and they enrich your life beyond anything you could imagine. But you're in this new phase, and that reminds me of the film that just came out that I watched, Race to 9A, with you and your buddies, your climbing buddies, Alex Honnold and Tommy Caldwell. And could you just I'll embed that film on the webpage for this, and then there'll be links to it in the episode notes. But I thought that was such a cool concept and a cool film about this moment in your life and in your buddies' lives as well. Could you just kind of give an overview of that to encourage people to click through and watch it?
Definitely. Yeah. So this is a film about the three of us having a gentleman's challenge, just a handshake. And the whole concept of it was just to have a little boost of inspiration from each other, and a little friendly competition to hold yourselves accountable, because we're all getting a little bit older. And so I'm 45, Tommy's 46, Alex is, I think he's 38, 39, maybe. Yeah, he's in that range. He's probably 39 this year. He's probably approaching 40 now. And we just see, like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at, us at 50 and being like, are we capable of doing at 50 what we can do now at 40 or whatever the number is? You project yourself 10 years out and you're like, you can still probably climb at a high level or do activity at a high level, but are you realistically going to do it higher than what you could have at 40 or 30 or 20? And so we just felt this pressure of like, hey, time is not on our side here. We gotta fight back a little bit. And I think with life, we were all getting a little bit complacent with our training. We're like, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll train tomorrow, right? Like it's a very common thing for all of us to fall into. I don't have to train today. I'll do it tomorrow. But tomorrow turns into the next day and turns into a week, and suddenly you realize, we all quickly realize we're not doing the work that we want to be doing to get the results we want. And I think this challenge was actually just a kind of a way for us to hold ourselves accountable and to make sure that we're showing up the way we want to. And I think we really all really enjoyed it. And I believe that we're all still working towards it, even though throughout the movie, you'll see that, I did manage, and it's never been a fair challenge to begin with. We all live in different places. We have access to different routes, different style, and I mean, Tommy's missing half of one finger. Alex just had a newborn baby. Our children are a little bit older. And so we all have these, it gets complex, but it's just this, like Alex said, it's a proxy for becoming a better, stronger athlete than you were last year.
I generally try not to ever look at comments, because I've zoned in that comments are what bring out the worst in me on the internet. But I did look at the comments on the video, and it was so cool because there were so many people in there. It's like, I'm a 45-year-old who's been climbing for 20 years, and this film really resonated with me. Or I'm 50 years old, and this is exactly the same kind of things I'm thinking about. And I think that is the same thing as your book. Like, it's just very relatable to people of all different experience levels, all different experiences in life. And so I really loved it, man. I thought it was great. So people who are listening, you can click through and watch it. It's like 30 minutes. Definitely worth the watch.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, that was fun, man. So we talked a bit about authors that have influenced you, but I always like to ask about specific books. And it could be, from when you were a kid, or it could be a book you read recently. Like, I always think about My Side of the Mountain. That was one of the most influential books I ever read as a probably 12-year-old. Any particular books or authors that have played a big role in your evolution, both professionally and personally?
That is crazy that you just said that. That was the first book I ever finished. Was My Side of the Mountain.
Liked you. Yes. Isn't that the best book ever, man?
It's so good. And,
so good.
It ignited like that wonder and curiosity and challenge and peacefulness and solitude. And yeah, it ignited something in me for sure. It's interesting because my son now has to read that this year. And I was like, what? You're still part of the, and, but yeah. I mean, there's, since then there's a lot of kids books have come out, and, maybe it doesn't have the same impact as it once did. Times are so different right now with technology and, but that was a very a memorable book. It was the first book that I ever picked up and read start to finish, another book was The Power of One. I don't know if you've ever read that one.
I've heard of it. I've not read it though.
Yeah. I read that soon after, again, as a teenager, and there was, I don't know, something about it. I guess I kind of, connected with. I think that's why we finish books. We connected them somehow. So The Power of One, I think it was the author's first book that they had ever, novel that they had ever written. And I think it did very well. So that was another one. Old Man and the Sea.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I read that in sixth grade. I clearly remember reading that one.
Yeah, isn't that funny how, it paints this picture inside your brain that you can always go back and revisit somehow, even though the writing is so simple and straightforward. So yeah, there's definitely books out there for sure. But I would say those are three that I have a very distinct memory of reading. So yeah, it's funny you brought that up.
Isn't that funny how those things can kind of burn into your brain like that? And it's just, I actually read My Side of the Mountain out loud to my oldest daughter a few years ago. And, I was tearing up, this is the best book ever. All right. So you've been so generous with your time, but I got one more question for you.
No problem at all. Thank you.
So there's just so much going on in the world right now. A lot of good stuff, but a lot of crazy, challenging stuff as well. I know with your work with Patagonia, Patagonia is huge on the advocacy side of things, and they do so much to fight for the things that we all as outdoor lovers think are important. And so it could be related to that, or it could just be related to your thoughts on where things are now with you and your family. But just any kind of final words of wisdom, any way you want to wrap this up? Again, the humble guests they always say, I'm not qualified to give words of wisdom, but I'm begging you, I need wisdom from you to me.
Yeah, I'm certainly not. I think one of the lessons that I've learned through others and through reading has been, to not get overwhelmed by the things we can't control, and to focus more clearly on the things we can control. And, and if that means, the things you do in your household and the things you buy for your household and the car you drive and, how you treat other people on a daily basis and how you approach your systems and your parenting, like those things all make a huge difference. And I think if we could all collectively, and as 8 billion people on the planet, but at least in our sphere, we could focus on that, as opposed to letting the fear and the things we can't control, letting that get the best of us, because it changes the way we behave. And if we could just recenter and focus on the simple things that we can do, I think that's been a helpful sort of lens for me to constantly look back at, looking at the big picture and then, kind of narrowing in and kind of finding the balance between the two, because, I hope that's helpful, because, at the end of the day, life is work, and it's important to work on the things we can control. And I think that gives us a sense of, pride, like something to be proud of, and a sense of direction as well, which is really helpful. So if I was to pass on anything that I think I've learned, I think that's one of them, is to, don't get too caught up in the headlines that we can't control, because oftentimes they pass. And, it's interesting when, a scary headline hits us, how emotionally the media is no longer really the media. They're
ad salesmen.
It's designed to trigger us emotionally. And so if we get caught up in that, then we're always sort of on this emotionally triggered and not regulated. And when you focus on the things you can control and you focus on gratitude, I feel like humans can be, and hopefully are, more grounded and more regulated. And what we find, or what I've found, is the things pass, and they're sometimes not as bad as the media is trying to play it out to be. And so, at the end of the day, it's just get back to work, get back to work. Don't fall victim to this rabbit hole of headlines and such. It's not to say that you can't be involved and you can't make change. Of course you can, but you can do that by doing the work. And so, despite the headlines, despite the emotionally triggering, things that are sort of designed to grab us, stay focused, do what you can do, focus on the things you can control, and get back to work. I'm using that lately as sort of a reference for distraction.
I love it, man. I think that is super wise, and I've just loved this whole conversation, and I love the book, and I really, really appreciate you taking the time to chat, man. I know there's tons going on right now, but seriously, that was really, really fun, and I just thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's an honor, and I'm so glad you enjoyed the book. It means a lot, because when you put something out there, you just don't know who's gonna, who you're gonna connect with, if anyone. And so when you get feedback, it's every little bit helps. So thank you very much, and I hope your listeners got something from this today too.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. 1 email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way, so head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.